What's going on, 80K Sports Performance families? Coach Ryan here this week with another Coach's Corner. This week I wanted to talk a little bit about training for speed versus conditioning. And this is a common conversation I have with athletes and parents of athletes that are kind of talking about our programming and what they already do and what they might be doing in sports practices. And a lot of people, their goal for their athletes or the goal of the athlete themselves is to get faster and to build speed. And they say that they're doing that at their sports practices, but then when we talk a little bit deeper, we find out that they're not actually training for speed, they're actually just conditioning. And there's a really big distinction between training for speed and just going and getting in some conditioning and building that cardiovascular base. And a quote that I really like that I saw the other day is that when training for speed, fatigue is the enemy. So basically, when you're training for speed, the goal isn't to necessarily get super tired. And that's where a lot of people kind of confuse that differentiation between our speed training and our conditioning training. When we're conditioning, you're probably going to be pretty tired after doing that workout or that part of your workout. When you're training for speed, it's important to have a really high intensity effort during that sprint, but then a full recovery before your next repetition. So that's really when you're going to be training speed, is that really high intensity sprint followed by a full recovery. So in our training, when we're working with our athletes, we do time sprints every time our athletes are in because it is super important to be training speed and training it properly. And the way that we ensure that we're training it properly is that we're making sure our athletes are fully resting in between their sprints. So they give that max effort on whether it be a fly in 10, 5, or 15, and then they have their 10-yard sprint. And they're resting about a minute per 10 yards that they sprinted. So if they are sprinting 25 total yards of a 15-yard fly-in and a 10-yard sprint, we want them to rest about 2 to 3 minutes in between repetitions. And while that might seem excessive, that's how we're actually going to start training speed versus just working conditioning. So it's really important to make sure that when you're training speed, you're actually doing it properly, and it's not just speed training that actually ends up really being conditioning training. So make sure when you're doing your speed training, make sure that it is maximum intensity with a full recovery in between, so that way you're actually training speed, not just doing extra conditioning work on top of that. If you have questions about training speed and how to actually maximize your speed training, feel free to comment below, send me an email, or reach out any way that you can find us.